In the beginning, Elohim, God, created everything, and he said it was good. But Adam and Eve soon found themselves face to face with evil. Of the two sons, one killed the other purely out of envy, and mankind has never been the same since. But what is evil? On today's episode, we're going to be speaking with philosopher and Christian apologist, Dr. Khaldoun Sweis. Welcome to Questions in the Desert. Hi, good morning, Dr. Sweis. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate this.
It is an honor, Jason. Thanks for having me, brother.
Absolutely. So I'd like to just ask a couple of questions on evil. And I'd like to just start off with, as a child, I grew up understanding that if there was something evil, it had to do with Satan. And if I did anything wrong, it was because the devil made me do it. How can we get a better understanding, or what kind of an understanding should we have about what evil is?
Let's start getting to this thing about the devil made me do it, isn't it? We have to get to that. What that is a pushing or a lack of taking of responsibilities in culture in general. We usually blame society, we blame the community, we blame the government, then ultimately we blame the devil. So instead of doing what we need to do as mature adults, taking responsibility for the errors and the problems and ultimately the evils that we have perpetuated upon the culture and upon ourselves, we blame somebody else. And who better than to blame than the devil, who we consider evil incarnate, which, by the way, is a problem. The devil, as we've considered, is the shaitan in Hebrew, the accuser, who ultimately was and essentially was the archetype of evil in mythology as well as in Western religions. He is the epitome of all that is dark and vile and malevolent. The problem is this being originally started off as an angel of light or an archangel in the very throne of God who had fallen from grace. So he was originally a good being, Lucifer, whose name actually means the light bringer or the morning star, because he was so incredibly bright and beautiful. And he said in his heart, according to the prophet Isaiah, I shall sit on the throne of the Most High God. I will not bow to him. His pride had led him to fall. But notice, he was good and then he went bad. He was holy and he became unholy. He was righteous and he became unrighteous. This is general progression, what you have in all of nature, in all of theology, in all of the spectrum of morality itself. The very essence of the universe, the very center of being is God, the creator of the universe, whose goodness itself. So evil, by definition, then, would be a negation of that goodness, a delineation from that goodness, a moving away from that goodness, a denial of that goodness. So there is no incarnate absolute evil. So the devil's not absolutely evil. He is a fallen angel who had taken on characteristics that made him less godly. And this is what we call evil. There are many different definitions of it. How far you want me to go with some of the different theories on what that is, Jake?
Yeah, no, that's, I think that gives a really good, a good overview.
If I may, Augustine said evil is privation, as darkness is the lack of light, evil is the lack of good. Aristotle said that evil is part of what's called moral weakness. The reason we do evil, the reason we give in to things that we should not be doing, and many of us do the things we know we shouldn't be doing, but we still do them, it's because he says weakness kicks in. When you're hungry and there's nothing in front of you but a chocolate cake and you know you shouldn't be eating it, but because you haven't eaten it so long, your ability to resist is weakened. So you're able to give into that. And that applies not only sexually, aggressively, monetarily, financially, in different ways people give into what they shouldn't do because they're just weak at that point. Not because they have a tendency toward vileness or evil or just deception per se. So there's a lot more to evil than just saying it's a lack of goodness. It's also a lack of weakness and strong moral character. The old adage, I'm sure you don't know if you heard this one before, within all of us, and St. Paul talked about it, is the old nature and the new nature. Okay? Those who are redeemed by the living God, Christ, who have the born again experience, who have a renovation or rejuvenation or a renaissance of the heart. And what Christians call that is the born again experience dictated by Jesus of Nazareth in John chapter 3 to Nicodemus. Once you have that or given to that, or God redeems you in your way, you have at that point changed from one nature to two. And those two natures within you is the old man and the new man. And the Apostle Paul calls it the flesh and the spirit. And these are always at war. And the parable goes like this. There were two dogs that were constantly fighting each other. They're exactly equal, but they are at war. And sometimes one wins and sometimes one loses. The question is, which one? And the answer is the one you feed the most. What do you watch? What do you read? Who do you spend time to? What do you listen to? These things are cultivating your spirit either toward evil, malevolence, wickedness, deception, or it's cultivating your spirit toward holiness, goodness, the true, the good, the humble, the bright, that which is worthy of praise. So what dog are you feeding on a daily basis determines whether you're acting more evil or acting more good, whether you're becoming more selfish, becoming more inward, being ungodly, or you're becoming more godly, more holy, more virtuous.
You've touched on some great topics of evil, but it brought to mind, back in the garden, was Adam and Eve, prior to the fall, was their two dogs, were they more overlapped, or were they overlapped where they had, in innocence, they didn't have this struggle until the fall, or I know that's going to be there's a lot of unspoken, but just logically, can we assume something like that, or how do you think it was in the garden, and does God want us to get back to that if that's the case?
You ask a profound question, man. You have to go there, don't you? The difficulty with that question is that theologians have wrestled with this question since the beginning. I'm going back to the rabbis as well. How could a good man that God made, the first man, the Adam, be at a position or even at a point where he can even be tempted, let alone do that which is evil or wrong or vile or away from what God has called him to do? That's an interesting question theologians have struggled with. Paul called him the first Adam, or the first man. Now, Jesus is the new Adam, right? Or the second Adam. When Adam was made, God gave him the concept of goodness, but he did not give him the full nature of Christ. He did not give him what the new Christ will give, or the second Adam will give to those who are redeemed after the cross. And that also moves back, by the way, through time. The redemption of Christ also will touch Adam and his descendants, in addition to the people after the cross. So when Adam and Eve sinned, the question is, how is it possible that such a perfect woman and a perfect man can fall? There's an assumption. Why are we assuming they're perfect? They were good. God said they were very good. But that's a far cry from being perfect. And to be very good is to be as close to perfection as you can, but not there. Because the only one who is perfect, Jake, is the absolute of the absolutes himself, God. And when God creates, by definition, whatever he creates becomes lesser than him. And the highest epitome of humanity and personhood is the ability to choose right and wrong. To choose whether I will follow the words and the dictates of my Father, or whether I will follow my own dictates, of whether I will keep him on the throne or I will put myself on the throne. And that is what the shaitan, the devil, when he slithered into the garden, and when he took on the form and the incarnation of the serpent, that's what he tempted Adam with. Will you decide to follow him or not? And Adam decided, I'm not. I'm going to follow my own dictates. I'm going to follow and put myself on the throne rather than God. And that started the chain reaction, the domino effect of sin throughout the human race. Keep in mind, throughout the human race, sin did not start in the garden. It started way back in heaven itself, when Satan himself, with a legion of angels, turned their face and spit in the face of God.
Dr. Sweiss, I wanted to interject really quickly, kind of back up a little bit and ask, I understand that you are in the process of writing a book. I was wondering if you could tell us the title of that book and also the source of inspiration.
I'm sure. Thank you for that. The book is titled Gazing into the Abyss, 25 Questions on Suffering and Evil. It comes from a phrase by Friedrich Nietzsche, the atheistic philosopher, writer, existentialist writer, who argued that the longer and the more you look into the abyss, the more it looks back into you. However, in order for us to really understand the nature of evil and the nature of wickedness, we do need to look into the abyss, but we need to look at it in a standard platform of holiness around the cross of Christ. Otherwise, we can get sucked into it, and we have to hold on to that cross. The inspiration for that book came in 2006 when my son Enoch died. It was a very dark time in my life and my family's life. He died in my arms as a baby. All my hopes and dreams of being a father and starting a family were dashed at that point. I had come to a point a couple of weeks later where I collapsed on the floor like a fetal position, weeping, recognizing the intensity of the loss. It's a terrible situation for anyone to lose a child. And many people have lost worse than I have. Through that experience, Jake, I learned that those who do not let God transform their pain, they end up transmitting it. Those who do not get redeemed and take redemption from their suffering end up hurting other people. Hurt people end up hurting other people. Unless you end up giving yourself over to Christ and his cross and his suffering and recognizing that he has a way and a truth through this, and that all things will work together for the good of those who trust God, who are called according to his purpose. Then you can transform that pain. And one of the things God's taught me through this is I've learned that I don't have to give in to bitterness and shame and anger. I can use that and not bow down to it, but use it as a fire, as a fuel to help others and guide them out. And God picked me up, lifted me up out of the pit, put me on the mountain, called me by his name, reminded me that I will see my son again, because he said, because I live, you will live. And I took that, and I was able to take my training in apologetics and theology and psychology and other fields and put together a book and a ministry called Logically Faithful to help others who have also struggled and are currently struggling through that. The book is in the works right now. It's forthcoming, so I'm looking for, it's in the process. So there'll be announcements soon of when it'll be published.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very touching and encouraging. Secular world, or in the non-Christian believing world, there's a common question for regarding God. If there is an all-powerful, all-good, and all-just God, how come he allows evil and suffering in the world? What would be a good answer for that, for somebody who would ask?
I would first, before I begin to even touch this very volatile issue, is to ask questions of the questioner. Ask them why they're asking. Sometimes people want an intellectual, robust academic response. Others are telling you from a depth of pain that they just watched their father commit suicide. And they're looking for comfort, they're looking for hope. They're not looking for an academic, detailed theological exposition. So you need to, when somebody asks you the question, ask the question back. Why are you asking? What's on your heart? So that's important that you answer the person, not necessarily the question per se. With that said, in an academic sense, Epicurus and other great philosophers of the past, many have brought forth the charge that the suffering we see in the world, the kidnappings we see on a daily basis, we have more children in sexual slavery today than any time in human history. We have poverty that's rampant throughout the world. More people live in a level of poverty than any other time. Although poverty rates are actually decreasing around the world, but still there are people living through that. There are people who are born and diagnosed with debilitating diseases. So you ask the question, if God's in charge, how could he let this happen? First, question your assumptions. You cannot have evil unless you assume there's good in the universe. And Immanuel Kant brilliantly put this forward. In order for you to even have a concept of the just, you need to first assume there is the just. In order for you to assume there's a moral law, you have to assume there's a moral law maker in the very structure of the very universe itself. So for you to say there's something is evil is to assume there's good, and then you're assuming that there's a goodness behind it. So the very argument against evil assumes God. or assumes an absolute that judges good and evil. It's more than just subjective, right? And secondarily, when, and moving on to the cross of Christ, Christianity, in contradistinction, paradoxically, to every other religious system, says that God himself doesn't just sit on the throne and watch us in our suffering. No, no, no. He comes off his throne, walks on the earth himself as a man, takes on our sin, takes on our pain, takes on our suffering on his own back. And the cross that Christians wear is one of the most paradoxical symbols in all of history. It takes the absolutes of what we consider the goodness of God, justice, truth. And then we take the evils of the world, malevolence, vileness, wickedness. And we put those together, clash them together, where the holiest of the holy, Christ, suffers for the sin of mankind, because people have violated the laws of God so much that God himself has to act in that. He has to judge the evils. He has to judge the wickedness. He has to judge the slavery. He has to judge the genocides. He has to judge the poverty that we have perpetuated upon each other. And that is where his judgment comes down, allowing those people to suffer for that as a corporate level. So God does allow that to happen on a corporate level. And those who want to be redeemed will find that redemption in Christ, where he will take on that suffering on himself. One of the major things God does in the universe is he uses suffering, pain, evil for good. He transforms it like a caterpillar going through a cocoon that ultimately, through its suffering, through its pain, and ultimately through its death, becomes the butterfly. This, Jake, is in every field. If you go to the gym, your muscle has to break down in order for the muscle to get bigger. In order for you to get a degree in any field, you have to go through the suffering of classes and the monotonous toil in the library and research in order for you to achieve the degree. In order for you to have a good relationship with someone, you have to first, of course, after the romance period has passed, go through a strife period, a disagreement period, a breakdown period. And from that breakdown, you liven up for a more stronger relationship. The seed must break into the ground for the flower to come from it. This is a structure in physiology as what in your cells or your body as much it is in biology. Things have to break down in order for them to lift up. And Christ says you have to die to yourself, give yourself over to me, and then you'll find true hope. And that true hope ultimately comes by dying, recognizing the ultimate death is the death of God on the cross and the resurrection of Christ, who is God risen from the dead, God the Son, as the archetype symbol of suffering and grace and resurrection. And that archetype symbol is not just mythological, it's also historical.